want to welcome you all here this morning. Nice, cool winter morning again. Yeah, we're excited to be here meeting together again. I was thinking through, and still going through in my devotions, 1 Samuel this week. And if I can encourage you guys in any way, if you want a good read, a story read, go to 1 Samuel. It's full of all kinds of interesting stories. But what really stuck out to me this week is, I think, about three things. One, what friendship does for someone. Just reading the story of David and Jonathan and seeing how Jonathan cared for David, even despite his own dad trying to go after him and kill him, and seeing the protection that Jonathan and comfort that Jonathan brought to David was quite something. I thought that was pretty neat. Second thing is, no matter how bad our world feels, there's always a worse world. David walked some pretty lonely paths in 1 Samuel. If you haven't read it, you should, because you'll understand Psalms a bit better. As you see David getting chased around the countryside by his father-in-law, technically, trying to, And yet, with that all being said, one thing that was really cool that I found is that David had multiple opportunities to exact revenge on Saul. There was twice that I read in 1 Samuel where he was actually within arm's reach of being able to do whatever he wanted to Saul. Take care of his problem. Just get rid of the problem. Probably most people would have been okay with that. No big deal. And David chose a completely different way to go because he said Saul was the anointed one of God. And so I don't know what kind of enemies or situations in your life you guys are going through right now. Maybe there's things that are arm's length that you just feel like getting rid of. The truth is, seek God's will. David sought it, and eventually we know the story of David. It turned out very well for David. And he becomes king in Israel. We see that his faithfulness throughout a time where things could have been very different, he chose to be faithful. And to me, that was a great encouragement this week as I was reading that. Sometimes I have a hard time finding things when I'm reading through the Old Testament and feeling super encouraged. There is, for those that are reading 1 Samuel, if you're reading it with your kids, you might have to do some explaining because there are definitely moments that are above more in the R-restricted range of things. But at the same time, some of that's good to know. That was history. That's technically our history that's brought us to this point. And to see that it can be an encouragement as well as challenging. Today we've got a few things. Things are going to be a little different. I know normally we would have some music. Today we're not going to have music, but we're going to exchange it for a game. Because why not? It's January, and we might as well have some game. And we're nicely separated in here. Great cohort. I don't know what we call it. So we're going to play this game with one side and the other side. So it's going to take some crowd involvement. It's not going to be one that isn't. We love doing these kind of things at youth, and you guys are all going to get to be youth today. So for those that are watching online, it is morning. Sorry I said tonight, but it is morning. You are at the right place at the right time. Okay. So I'm going to call Becky up here. We have created what we have called the Old Testament, New Testament mashup charades. Okay? So these charades are a mash of an Old Testament famous story and a New Testament parable. So that is what you're going to be solving as groups. So if you need to I know we're kind of spread out, but if you need to bring yourself just slightly closer for this in order to be heard, that's fine. You want to do a competition style?
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay. So then, it's as simple as this. Becky, what do we need?
Okay, we need one person from each team to come up and be willing to act.
Okay.
Don't move too fast.
So this team, you'll act in this area. And that team will act where Becky is.
If you're not volunteering, I'll volunteer.
I know, it's so scary because no one knows what these things might be.
Okay, Tim, why don't you come start on this side?
Oh,
Maybe, I was gonna say maybe we need more of that size than this side.
You never all told someone from that side. We'll pull no one. He was. Hey, no, you can't.
All right, Noah, you've been directly pulled. Okay, so you two guys have to come in here. Yeah, just acting, no speaking. Yeah. Okay. All right, let's give this a try. You guys ready? Your mark, get set, act.
David Goliath.
Jesus is stuck up.
Yes.
Oh my
That's because you're giant steps. They were really big. Okay, we need 2 new actors. Now you know how it goes. It's that simple. That was like 4 seconds worth of acting.
Kendall? Do it. Yeah,
All right. All right.
Watch him.
Set, act.
Okay. I don't know if they said it or
I
not.
think they did.
I said plank in the eye here. I was looking at the plank in the eye.
Yeah, I think the eye was good. I think I heard
I think
this
it was
first.
right here.
Sorry guys. Nice work. All right. Should you do one for that team and I'll do one for this team?
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Ready? No.
All right. Go.
Go.
New Testament now.
Now, sheep. Bad Samaritan. Sheep.
Okay. We got a couple more here. We need another 2 actors.
Okay, Dennis, go for it.
Holly?
Cool. Perfect. Excellent.
Oh, yeah.
And Rose will be next.
Good. Okay.
No, you don't
No,
have
you
to
don't
read
have
it.
to.
We're just telling you to.
Otherwise,
We're trying to read it so you can tell. Okay. All right. Whatever. Confidence. All right.
Go. John Will.
Oh my goodness.
What?
Well
Well
done.
Good guess.
Okay, what have we got left here? 2 more. Oh,
That's right. That's right. That's it. You know that.
Okay,
All right.
go for it.
Here we go.
Now, start.
And go.
Party Beating the Bible. We didn't beat Bible. The parable.
There it is. All right, they're up 3-2. 2 left here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Got 2 left. Bear, are you coming? Yes. I've watched her in children's church. She acts very well. Were you my narrator the one time when we did David and Goliath?
Andy's gonna come do it.
Andy, you love acting. You've been waiting for this moment for years. And now, Molly. Okay, I guess it's
Oh, yeah. No, I just need a perfect spot.
All right. Come here. Okay, give it. Go!
Opening a chest.
Treasure.
No, the hidden treasure.
Oh, there it is! Oh, so good today, so good. The tower of Babel finds the hidden treasure. Okay, we got one more. One more break. Someone can go twice if they need. You can play for that team now?
Do it.
You can do it.
It's just Noah. I'll actually do it. You'll actually do it.
Yeah! Don't play.
I would be scared of Noah too, but
I mean, I wasn't scared of Tim then.
that's why I got defeated last time. Defeated last time. Last time you almost lost. Oh, yeah. Okay, on your mark, get set, go.
Esther.
Breaking.
Table. He's on the second.
Oh, the wine and
Here.
presented.
Washing. You're being a servant. This is for the Beatitudes.
Doorway.
Rochi.
Happy.
And now you're
Just say
serving.
some words.
Judge. The wicked servant. He, what's it called? The wicked servant who is forgiven little but doesn't love much or expect much. The merciful, unjust. He was forgiven little, forgiven much. The forgiving servant, forgiven. Parable of the vision. Parable of the cookie.
The controversy of charades. It's perfect.
Sorry, I never heard it. It's okay. Unfair. I know. Like it's unfair.
All right. Thanks, Beck. All right. Well, now for those that have no idea what happens sometimes on Friday nights, this kind of stuff happens more often than you'd like to know. Yesterday, in fact, for those youth that were here, they could tell you what happened, but we actually started our first, maybe annual, we'll find out if it's annual or not next year, but we did World Record Night, because our theme was competitiveness. And so we had about, I think we landed up, we had 18 events, but I think we landed up doing about 14, something like that, of world records. So we've kept them, we've treasured them in a book somewhere. They will be held. Some people may never have their records broken in 10 years. We come back to them and say, look at you. But yeah, it was a fun time of making new world records on weird things. So that was good. Today we have a speaker with us, Kendall Schmidtke. For those that don't know Kendall and Tamara, and this is their kids, Becca and Donovan, they live down the road from us. They live, for those that need reference, Wes and Jackie Ides' old yard is what they are now the takers of. So it's been great having them in the community. It's been great getting to know them. We met them because of their kids, but now they're good friends of ours as well, so that's great. So we have asked him to come speak for us this morning, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what Kendall says. So come on down, I'm going to pray with you, and then we'll turn this over to you. All right. Dear God, thank you for this morning. I thank you, Father, that you have given us the chance to meet together, that you give us the chance, God, to just be able to dig into your word, to look for things, God, that maybe we need to know in our hearts, things that we need to be practicing, God. And we thank you, especially for Kendall this morning, that you brought him where you brought him in life to be able to just share your word with people, God. We thank you for the gifts that you've given him, and we pray this morning that just as he pours out words to us, God, that we would hear the words that you have for our hearts, and that in turn we would be able to listen to those things and just use them throughout the week ahead. Yeah, we just pray a blessing over Kendall this morning. Amen. Oh, time out, Kendall. There is Children's Church. Who's leading Children's Church? Becky? All right. Follow Becky. She'll lead you into places that aren't wrong. We'll turn this off. I think he's got this. Oh, so I wasn't sure if I'm break was there or what.
Probably is on. Well, it's great to be here. I've heard a lot about you guys. When we moved here in the middle of the pandemic, after our 2 weeks of quarantining on the property with no internet and not supposed to, no mailbox, even post office box set up, nothing. It was Pleasant Valley Church was the first place we went, and we just have kind of never left. So sorry about that. I don't know if you know that I have a background in ministry. I was a pastor for many years, and then a church planter, and then I worked with a parachurch organization for a while, and now I'm kind of bivocational. We have a little business and do some things on the side, sort of tent making. But my real heart is for church planting and for house churches. And I work with leaders that are starting churches in their homes. And including Jason Peters here in town. And we've worked and have a house church running in town here now for the last, ever since they moved here in July, I suppose. But anyway, enough about me. When Kevin and Becky asked me if I would share, this passage was on my heart. But before we get to that, years ago we bought our first house. We were living in British Columbia, and I was so excited to actually have my own property because I wanted a garden. And I wanted fruit trees, and I wanted like berry bushes. I know Kevin and Becky are kind of have done the same thing. If you ever wandered through their yard, it's one of their passions as well. And when I was growing up, it was a big passion of our family. So I couldn't wait to have my own piece of property and then start. So sure enough, we moved into the property. There was a garden there, so I started working it, and there was a half an acre of lawn. And there was this one strip of lawn down near the fence on one side that just grew like a rainforest. It was so lush and thick, the grass there. So if I mowed my lawn long before the rest of the lawn needed another cutting, that was due. And if I waited until the rest of the lawn needed cutting, you know when you get your lawnmower and you have to lift it up and go, pull it back, to try to get through that thick, heavy lawn? So there was times when I would start up my lawnmower just to do that strip, and then the next week I would do the whole lawn again. Just had this super, super rich ground growing there. And then one day, after struggling for years, I had a friend who had prize-winning raspberries. And she offered me a dozen canes. And I thought, where am I going to plant these? My garden is kind of full. Where am I? And of course, I thought, I'm going to plant it where I hate mowing. I'm just going to dig holes, and right in the grass, I threw these prize-winning raspberry canes in a long row along my fence. And they thrived. They just absolutely took off. And I remember regretting the years that I wasted my most fertile ground. I remember thinking, oh man, all these years I've been fighting with that and wasting my most fertile ground. Keep that in the back of your mind as we go to Luke 19. So if you have a Bible or an app on your phone, Luke 19 is the story of Zacchaeus. I'm going to just read the whole thing. It's 10 verses. And then we'll carry on. But this is the famous story of Zacchaeus, the tax collector. So Jesus entered Jericho, it says in Luke 19, verse 1, and was passing through, and a man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. Now, I think you might probably know this, but tax collectors would go around and make sure everyone pays their taxes to Rome, who was occupying Israel at the time. So they were kind of viewed as traitors. And oftentimes, if the tax collector said, you don't fill out a form and there's not an exact science, the tax collector shows up and says, you owe X, Y, or Z. And whatever he says, you're bound legally to pay. And so sometimes they would line their own pockets. They would say, you owe this amount of money, and then they would pass on a lesser amount of money and keep the change. And so they were often viewed as scoundrels, crooks, but worst of all, traitors to the Jewish nation. So this guy's a chief tax collector. He's in charge of tax collectors, and therefore very wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he couldn't because of the crowd. So he ran ahead, climbed a sycamore fig tree to see Jesus, since Jesus was coming that way. And when Jesus reached the spot, this is that famous moment, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He's gone to be the guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I'll pay back 4 times the amount." And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save what was lost." So this is a very, very familiar story. Even our kids sing about this story. You remember? Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up in a sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see. And when the Savior passed that way, he looked up in the tree and said, "Zacchaeus, you come down, for I'm going to your house today. For I'm going to your house." We could talk about Zacchaeus' faith in climbing the tree. We could talk about his astonishing repentance in giving away half of his wealth. But notice how Luke zeroes in and highlights Zacchaeus' house. Even our kids' song, "For I'm going to your house today." I want to talk about Zacchaeus' house. Zacchaeus' house is actually a key player in this story. So if you are kind of scanning through, Zacchaeus climbs up in the tree, and Jesus says, "Come down, I'm going to your house." A couple verses later, the people mutter. Why? Because he talked to Zacchaeus? No. Because he stopped? No. Because he's gone to be the guest at Zacchaeus' house. And then when Zacchaeus repents, Jesus says, salvation has come to this household today. Luke notices something about, well, kind of a big deal, that Jesus invited himself over. Jesus invited himself over. It is kind of remarkable that Jesus didn't stop and say to Zacchaeus, "Zacchaeus, you don't have to climb the tree to see me. I'm in the temple courts every Sunday from 9:30 to 11 teaching," or I guess not Sunday, every Sabbath. But he didn't invite Zacchaeus to come to the sacred building where we talk about religion at the set time when we have that prepared. He invited himself onto Zacchaeus' turf, and right into his home. He went home with him. If I think back about the pastors that I had in my life growing up, one looms large, and it was Pastor Steve. Pastor Steve and his family, they loved us. I know they loved us. I remember this one time, we were all sitting at the dinner table, and my family was very active in our church. Like, my dad was a treasurer and always on the board, and my mom was in charge of the missions committee, and we practically lived at the church. We were there pretty much every day of the week, and anyway, we were very involved, but also very close friends. And I remember we were sitting around the dinner table, our whole family, eating, and all of a sudden we heard the front door open. And we looked around like everyone's here. Who just walked into our house? And we heard someone coming up the stairs, and it was Pastor Steve. So we're sitting around the table, and he walks in, doesn't even look at us. He walks in, walks over to the fridge, opens the fridge, and bends down like this. And we're all sitting at the table, start giggling to ourselves, what is happening? And then he stood up, and he had a jar of my mom's homemade pickles open. He always loved and raved about the pickles. He helped himself, and he stood up like this, took a big old bite out of a pickle, And then that's when he turned and looked at us, all sitting and staring at him. And that's how I knew he loved us. That's how I knew that. And I remember what he said. He said, "Oh, Martin," to my dad. He said, "Martin, I was on my way home," and we all laughed again because our house from the church is not on his way home. It is the other way from. He said, "I had a question, and I was on my way home, and no, he had a question, so he swung by, but that's how I knew he loved us." I don't think Zacchaeus would have gone to the tabernacle or the temple. I know some modern day Zacchaeuses. You know some modern day Zacchaeuses? I know some modern day Zacchaeuses who, and like Zacchaeus, he could have gone to the temple. I don't know if his life would have been changed. So, Jesus invites himself over. This was actually a hallmark of Jesus' ministry. So, come with me for just a little second through the New Testament. I want to look at a few other passages, and I want us to see that this was like a habit of Jesus and his disciples and the early church. They engaged on each other's turf and in each other's faces. So, okay, first example, and we end up over in Mark chapter 2. So, Mark chapter 2, we have the calling of Levi. So it starts at verse 13. But Jesus is just starting his ministry. He hasn't even called any disciples yet. And then it says in verse 14, Mark 2:14, as he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. Another tax collector, coincidentally. "Follow me," Jesus told him. And Levi got up and followed him. And while Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, so follow me. Okay, where are we going? Well, your house. What you got in the fridge? Pickles? While they were having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And when the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, so same gist, right? They said, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And Jesus says, "Not the healthy, you need the doctor, it's the sick." But he walks up to Levi and he says, "Follow me, and we're going to your place." Now go to Luke chapter 9, back into the book of Luke, but earlier than the story of Zacchaeus. So in Luke 9, Jesus sends out the 12. His disciples are around him, and he begins to send them out, remember, 2 by 2, into the towns to prepare the way for his coming. Look what he says to them, starting around verse 3. He tells them, "Take nothing for the journey. No staff, no bag, no bread, no money, no extra tunic. Whatever house you enter, stay there until you leave that town. And if people don't welcome you, shake the dust off your feet when you leave the town as a testimony against them." So they set out and went from village to village, preaching the gospel, healing people everywhere. That's Luke 9. Very next chapter, Luke 10. Now he sends out the 72, right? So the crowd is, more and more people are coming and following in faith. Now he sends out the 72. He says the same thing, verse 2. "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord to send more workers," right? Verse 3, "Go, I'm sending you out like lambs among wolves. Don't take a purse or bag or sandals. Don't greet anyone on the road. And when you enter a house, first say, 'Peace to this house.' If a man of peace is there, your peace will rest on him. If not, it will return to you. Stay in that house, eating and drinking, whatever they give you, for the worker deserves his wages. Do not move around from house to house." Do you see what he said? He started his ministry by walking up to people and saying, "I'm going to live with you. I'm going to, what's for dinner? I'm coming over." And then when his disciples, they start to follow him, he says, "Go, walk into the village, find the man of peace." How will you know it? Well, he's the guy who will let you come in and live with him. Move in with him. Move right in and live and eat, and whatever he's eating, eat it. Whatever he's drinking, drink it. Move right in and share your life with him. That is how Jesus started the church. That's how he started the church. Now I'm going to tell this story. When we first moved to Ontario, I wanted to get to know some of my neighbors. And there was a guy, no, I'm going to skip the story. I don't want to tell it. Never mind. Now I kind of have to tell it, don't I? It's no big deal, but I don't know how you'll feel about this. So I'm just going to say it anyway. You think what you think about me. So Fernando and Linda were this amazing couple, kind of Latina couple, and they lived a couple doors down from us. Very warm, hospitable people, but I didn't know that yet. And one of the first days when I was there, Fernando was sitting on his front porch on a hot, sunny day after work, drinking a beer. And so I just walked up his driveway, and held out my hand and introduced myself and said, I'm Kendall, we just bought the new house here, it was a new development. And he was kind of coolish towards me. And he's like, oh yeah, I heard about you guys. And I was like, okay. So I was the new pastor in town. I was pastoring at church, and we moved in there. That's what he had heard. I didn't know that at the time. And then he looks at me and he says, can I get you a beer? And this passage, eat what they give you, drink whatever, I said, absolutely. He's like, yeah, have a preference? I said, whatever you're drinking. It was years later that we built a really strong relationship. When we actually started a house church in our living room, we invited them, and they were some of the first people to attend. But he told me years later, he said, when you guys first moved here, I heard that there was a new priest had moved in next door. And he says, I didn't know what to think about that. But the first time that you sat on the porch and had a beer with me, I knew you were okay. So he told me. Anyway, they became fast friends of ours. I always think of him when I read that passage. Okay, so Jesus' ministry, this was a hallmark. Move in with people of his ministry. When you get on into the early church and Paul, you can read between the lines in his letters and see that the early church met in homes. So just a couple examples. In 1 Corinthians, when Paul signs off the first letter to the church in Corinth, he says in verse 19, so this is 16:19, he writes or closes his letter by saying, the churches in the province of Asia send you greetings. Aquila and Priscilla greet you warmly in the Lord, and so does the church that meets at their house. Okay, interesting. Colossians 4:15, he signs off his letter to the church in Colossae the same way. Give my greetings to the brothers at Laodicea and to Nympha and the church in her house. And then you get over to Philemon, and he writes to Philemon himself, but he opens his letter this time with greetings. He says, to Apphia, our sister, to Archippus, our fellow soldier, and to the church that meets in your home. And you start to get this picture of the early church that's different than we would assume. In fact, there's 3 times in the book of Acts when the church was going viral, when it was exploding and spreading and multiplying across the Roman Empire, even though it was under persecution. 3 times in the book of Acts, it says that the early church met in the temple courts and from house to house. Big and small. They met in the temple courts and from house to house. That's, you can see the references there if you want to look them up. But that famous one in Acts chapter 2, when it's just, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, the break of bread, blah, blah, blah. That's where it says. And they ate together daily, and they met in the temple courts and from house to house. And then it's repeated again, chapter 5. And then when Paul is telling his testimony in chapter 20, he says it again. He says, you know how I taught from temple courts and from house to house. It just shows up, you get this picture of this big, small rhythm of these celebration gatherings, but then this intimate relationship that the church enjoyed with each other. It wasn't until the Edict of Milan, 313 AD, that religious tolerance was established across the Roman Empire and churches were even allowed to own property. So they did not own property in the history of the church until it had been several centuries. And there's lots of places today in the world where the church is not allowed to own property, does not have religious freedom, and it may be because of government restrictions, it may be because of religious persecution, maybe because there are other dominant religions in the area that persecute, not necessarily the government. But there's many places in the world right now where the church is still spreading rapidly, house to house. Is that because they meet in homes? Or is it because of the persecution? Well, there's a lot of factors, I'm sure. But I've come to believe that one of the reasons that home ministry is so effective is because faith is more caught than taught. I had a wise man who's now passed away, but he was a spiritual leader and a teacher for many, many years. He told me this one time, it's never left me. He said, faith is more caught than taught. Remember, a Christian is someone who follows the way. Before we were known as Christians, we were known as followers of the way. So a believer is someone who follows the life, the way of Christ. And if your faith is legit, it will change the way you live. It is so much more than a set of doctrines you adhere to. Right? The faith is more than saying, I agree to these 11 fundamental doctrines. That's not actually what it takes to be a Christian. A Christian is someone who acts on what they believe and follows through in the way. Does that make sense? So when Jesus was showing people the way, he used a rabbinic model. Remember, they called him rabbi, and he said, follow me, and they became disciples of him. They basically left everything and then lived with him. This is the rabbinic model of teaching. You take an apprentice, and it's like a life apprenticeship. And so Jesus would invite people, and they would spend all their time together, do everything together, and the goal was to be like your rabbi, to be transformed into the likeness, and to act and think and do like your rabbi. That's the rabbinic model of teaching. And so that's what Jesus did, and the people close to him became like him and mentored others, and the faith spread through the Roman Empire. But the Roman Empire had a Greek model of teaching. So then when the church became sort of, the official religion of the Roman Empire, it adopted the Greek model of teaching. And the Greek model is different than the rabbinic model. The Greek model is you have an expert who lectures information, and students sit in rows and acquire the information. It's a very efficient way to pass facts and information down. It's not a great way to kind of bring about transformation in people. So we have inherited the Greek model of teaching by which we're trying to bring about life transformation. You see where it starts to get trickier. So the life of faith is so much more than a set of beliefs. These beliefs need to constantly be tested and practiced and worked out in tight quarters. Really, I think that's the missing link. That's what the rabbinic model brings about, is that if someone hurts you in practice, now you have to not just learn that you should forgive, you actually have to forgive Frank because of what he did. Right? And when someone tempts you, you don't just know that you should resist temptation, but now you actually have to resist this actual temptation and develop the fruit of the Spirit, self-control. When someone annoys you in close quarters, now you actually have to grow in grace instead of just talk about it and read about it and know about it. It's not an intellectual thing you assent to. It's something you actually have to put into practice. I think it's worth noting that Jesus didn't come to school or come to the world and start schools to teach doctrine. That's not what he did. He came and then he adopted people into the family of God and gathered them into communities of faith where they would practice and put their faith into action together. That's why Paul talked about working out your salvation with fear and trembling. I didn't tell you why that strip of ground in BC was so fertile. I could give you a guess, you'd probably get it. Why do you think there was a strip of really rich, fertile ground in my backyard? No one wants to say it in church.
Where that dog went?
Septic system. Close. Where the dog went, septic system. So years beforehand, before there was like sewer, we hooked up to sewer in that development, there was a septic field. And I learned that that stretch was where the old septic field had run, and still now, many, many years later, things there grew like crazy. It's where the crap was. It turns out our homes are where the crap is. Like, I've done a lot of thinking about why is it that ministry in homes is so fertile. And I'm going to little tangent for you here. So in church thought, there was a movement in like the 90s in church planting when they started talking about third space ministries. I don't know if you know anyone, there's probably not. So let me geek out for a second here. Third space ministries was like, we're going to start coffee shops where people can talk about their faith, and we're going to start a skateboard church and park, and we'll do like church there, and we're going to go in the bar and run alpha courses, and we're going to like create these, we're going to go to third spaces. So this sociologist had written this book about first spaces. First spaces are like your intimate places that you share and everyone has ownership, like your home. Second spaces are places that have shared ownership, like workplaces, gyms for people who have memberships there. Those were like second spaces. And then third spaces were these neutral areas, like coffee shops, parks, playgrounds, and places like that where people can come and go freely. So there was this move in church planting where we were trying to reach people who won't come to church. They wouldn't come to our second spaces anymore. Right? This was a movement in the West. It happened all across Western Europe, America, Canada, all post-Christian nations, where people who always used to have shared ownership in these second spaces, these churches and cathedrals we would build, people weren't coming anymore. Especially new people weren't coming. Youth were leaving. And so there was this thinking, maybe we need to try to go reach them in these neutral areas. Let's open up third spaces and try to bring spirituality to neutral places. And I just look back now and think to myself, I wonder if Jesus was trying to plant a church in 1997, I don't think he would have gone somewhere neutral and tried to be really, open. Do you know what I mean? Just that idea of we don't want to offend people, we want to just kind of bring them in. I think he would just jump right into their first space. He would open up, if he had a home, he would open his home and people would say, come live with me. And he'd probably move in and live with, do you know what I mean? It's like we had this dilemma, and we thought, let's try to reclaim the neutral areas. But the faith, that's a move away from intimacy. That was a move away, and intimacy is where the rubber hits the road with spirituality. It's the only place you can really learn spirituality, is in intimacy. And we kind of thought, let's become less intimate. And I think Jesus would have said, no, you need to be more. Anyway, that's just my Take it or leave it. Historically, this big and small balance is really hard to keep. Whenever, over the last 2,000 years, the church gained religious freedom, was able to build temples, big areas dedicated to spirituality and religious things, and then train priests, full-time people to look after that, wherever that happened, and the big became possible and easier, the focus of the church shifted to the temple. And the bulk of the ministries, the bulk of the resources, and the bulk of the focus and energy went to that. Which seems fine with the rest of us, because then our houses can be these safe bastions where we don't have to have so much friction and challenge, and we don't have to invite strangers and filthy people, and do you know what I mean? We seem okay. And so it doesn't take long when you have the opportunity to meet in the temple courts and from house to house for the temple courts to sort of take over. And next thing you know, 2 or 3 generations afterwards, church happens there once a week for an hour. And then we go back to our lives. That's not what we read about. It's not how it went. Okay. If it's true that faith is more caught than taught, then this would be a game changer for us. This might mean that sharing your faith is just sharing your life. What if sharing your faith was just sharing your life? I know people who've been Christians for 40 years, they still think they can't lead someone to Jesus. They think that I'll bring them to church and then the professional can I think there's 3 steps, or maybe there's a pamphlet I can give them. What if sharing your faith was, listen, pair up, go into a new town, find someone hospitable, and then live with them? What if sharing your faith was actually just sharing your life? Okay, if that were true, then I want to share 3 things I would do differently. If sharing your faith is just sharing your life, I would eat more with my church family. Sunday services are great, but if this is your spiritual family, you need to engage at a deeper level. I don't know much about RCC. I kind of have a suspicion I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys are way further down this road of understanding and practicing this than some churches that I've been in. If you think back, though, how many of you visited a church and stayed because someone invited you home for pot roast, that afternoon? How many of you engaged somewhere and stayed because you went home with someone? Or how many of you have been part of a small group or a Bible study midweek, and you look back at those seasons of your life and you say, those were some of the... If I think about where I grew the most in my last 30 years as a Christian, I remember those few years when I was part of that men's group, or that accountability relationship, or we had that small group running for every Wednesday night for years. Those are excellent ways to engage more deeply and get more spiritual traction. So I would eat more with my church family. I think that's kind of a lost art. When I was growing up, and not to pine for that but I just remember any given Sunday, my mom had enough food. We knew someone was coming over. We had no idea who. Someone was coming over for lunch. And we would go to church, and in the foyer is when we'd figure out who it was. It was either a newcomer, and if there wasn't no newcomers, then it was someone we haven't eaten with in a while. That was growing up in my house. I would eat more with my church family if sharing your faith is just sharing your life. Secondly, I would open my home to strangers more. The more I think about this, the more I become convinced that Christians should be lining up for foster care. Christians should be lining up for adoption. Christians should be lining up for exchange students. Christians should be lining up for refugee support and to help refugees engage in a new community. Like, we should be leading the charge in those arenas if this is true. There's actually a verse in Hebrews 13 where it says, don't neglect to entertain strangers. It's an obscure one that we don't talk about much because it says, because you might entertain an angel unawares. So the author of Hebrews is saying, in the past, and there are stories in the Old Testament where this happened, a stranger came and, Jacob goes and fixes a meal for him because it turns out it's an angel. But the author of Hebrews is saying, don't neglect the entertainment of strangers. And who knows? You may actually feed an angel. Lastly, if this is true, and faith is more caught than taught, and sharing your faith is just sharing your life, then I would invite myself over instead. I'd be more bold about that. Maybe you have a person in your heart, a coworker, a neighbor, another parent that you keep bumping into at Little League, and you just can't seem to find a natural way to invite them to church. You maybe know instinctively, I don't think that's going to fly. Invite them over instead. Have a barbecue, cook a meal, have them over, have a fire in your backyard and say, hey, do you want to come? Or like Jesus, who didn't have a home, invite yourself over. So I actually did this right before Christmas. There's a young couple living over towards Kane. And I've gotten to know him a little bit through a couple of brief work encounters and chatted a little bit. And I just feel like I need to witness to that couple. And I know that they're unchurched. So they've been on my heart. I've been praying for them. And then right before Christmas, I was like, I'm doing it. I phoned them up one day and I said, hey, how do you take your coffee? Do you like Timmy's? Yeah, great. How do you take it? Awesome. When you get off of work? What day is best for you? Friday? Awesome. I'll be there around 7. So I drove to Morris, got coffees, got a little box of Timbits for the kids, and I just rolled into his driveway. He was outside at the time. I ended up spending the entire evening, got the whole house tour, and broke the ice. Totally, do you know what I mean? You know what I mean by that. We finally broke the ice. I don't know if you guys are ready for benediction yet. So you can decide when you get up, if this was the benediction or if it's just a blessing. But I want to read to you out of Acts 2. This is my wish for RCC. I hope that they say this of you. That history looks back. Some of you look back and you reflect on those days when we used to meet at Kevin and Becky's shop. Remember when we didn't have a temple. Remember we didn't have a church building. Those were rich days. Because this is what they said of their early church. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts, and they broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. May it be so.
Extendal. That was it's a really good challenge. I don't know what you guys are doing for supper today, but this is a great challenge for us to take seriously, right? Go out there, welcome people, be a part of people's lives. I think there's nothing greater than that, and it's something that we all have the ability to do. Just sometimes takes some nerve. I think there was was it We Bought a Zoo or something? It's just 10 seconds of insane courage or something, right? It's all you need. So tonight, maybe if you have extra stuff in your fridge and it's just, or whatever you feel like you need someone, have that 10 seconds of insane courage and just go and invite someone down that you maybe have never invited before. Cool. Thank you very much for bringing that to us. That was actually a really good segue into next week too. So if any of you are coming next week, hopefully all of you are coming next week, we are going to have a service to celebrate Nick and Christy. We've appreciated their service over the last, I don't know, how many years you want to count, but it's at least over 7. Somewhere in there, I think. So we want to celebrate them next week here, and that means we're also going to have a potluck together. So, come prepared. Am I right? Brandy and Carol, potluck, right? I have to make sure I'm getting the right thing here, but potluck. So yeah, be prepared to stay after. We want to fellowship together with some food, so that's very timely on this front. But I'm just going to pray, and then we will end today's service. Father, I thank you so much for the reminders this morning, reminders of just what you, Jesus, did here on earth, how you welcomed people, how you looked to just involve yourself in their lives, whether they knew they needed you or not. And I pray, God, this week we would involve ourselves in people's lives, that we would take the time to actually meet them, not just to pass them by, God, to look after their needs, to be maybe good Samaritans in their lives, God. I pray that we would, go look for those opportunities, not just wait for them to come to us. And I pray, God, that you would just put those desires in our heart, put the people in our heart that we need to meet this week. Just pray these things in your name. Amen. Have a good week.